Election is getting some special attention. The House race for a seat the GOP has held for decades is viewed as a big test for President Trump's king-making abilities, or queen-making, depending on, and may give us a preview of how the midterm elections will shape up. You're watching Outnumbered on a fine Tuesday. I'm Harris Faulkner, here today Melissa Francis, Republican strategist and senior fellow for the Independent Women's Voice, the very independent Lisa Booth, syndicated radio talk show host, and a Fox News contributor and opinioner. Is that a word? Leslie Marshall.
I like it, though.
Joining us in the center seat, Fox and Friends weekend co-host Pete Hegseth with a military to civilian salute.
Absolutely.
On Outnumbered. We appreciate that.
Thanks.
Also, I like
I
this,
know you do.
the matching socks and tie.
Why not?
No, did you catch it?
It's
the
more than
shoelaces
that.
and the bottom of the shoe, the socks, and
It's a little
the
too
tie.
much. But
No,
Lisa,
no,
can
it's
you
not.
relax?
I like
You
it.
ladies
No,
are
it's
great.
perfect for a summer Tuesday.
Exactly.
What I
There
like
you
is
go.
how you color coordinated his tie with my dress.
You know how I like a little color wheel.
You're always-
All right, we better move on.
He
We're
didn't
getting
even
bored.
need to with Pete. He did it on his own.
Polls showing a dead heat in that special election in Columbus, Ohio area. Republicans have been pouring in resources and Democrats pushing hard for an upset. The two candidates, Democrat Danny O'Connor, Republican Troy Balderson, casting their ballots today. President Trump endorsing Balderson and speaking at a recent rally for him. The president today tweeted, Ohio, vote today for Troy Balderson for Congress. His opponent, controlled by Nancy Pelosi, is weak on crime, the border, military vets, your Second Amendment, and will end your tax cuts. Troy will be a great congressman. President Trump, with a pretty good record on his endorsements of the Republican candidates so far this year, 20-1 to be exact. And while the president looms large over the Ohio race, today's special election is also raising some big questions about the larger picture for both political parties headed into November. Watch it.
You do have a base there that is very much pro-Trump, but you need moderate Republicans, right? You need a lot of moderate women to also who've been leaning Republican to break your way. And why the district is so tight? I mean, it's a 20-plus Republican registration district. It shouldn't be close.
Well, it's certainly closer than it should be based on the polling that we've seen. But also remember that polling in a special election in a place like this is notoriously difficult to predict. But what we're looking at here is sort of a referendum on both not only Donald Trump, but also Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi has become a big issue in this district.
So let's talk about what Charlie Hurt in his new summertime haircut, which looks fabulous. He's chatting about too, right? Didn't we all notice that?
It's a good haircut.
It is.
Yeah.
So he's talking about polling, but 3 decades of leadership by Republicans. Right?
In that seat.
In that seat. So it's even more complicated than just the polling. What is happening that Republicans are this much on the precipice of losing a seat?
Well, you've got a lot of energy on the Democratic side. There's no doubt. I mean, the resist movement is real. Democrats hate President Trump. Make no mistake about it. His name is on the ballot. It'll be on every ballot, I think, all the way through November, whether that candidate wants it to or not. You've also got a Democratic candidate there running very much as a moderate. I went and looked at his website again today. It's almost like Connor Lamb in Pennsylvania, maybe a little bit less. I mean, there's a few buzzwords in there that speak to the Democratic base, but he's not going to vote for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker. He's saying, I'm going to work with all sides. So he's trying to look like a moderate, which most Democrats in today's party are nowhere near moderate. And then I think it will be who can energize their base the most. That's why Trump was there in a key county in that district.
So, Leslie, if you have to look like a moderate, how do you win like a socialist? Like, this might be one place, but that's not going to win all over the country.
You don't. Exactly. Like it's been said before, and I've even said, Brooklyn, New York is not Brooklyn, Iowa. We do have a party, just like Republicans have a party, where there are different factions of the party. And the Democratic Party right now obviously is very left or socialist. And then the more moderate Democrats, like me and others, and we are
there
out
aren't many of you left, though,
no, I think, but also in this race, what we're seeing some patterns. If you look at what happened in Pennsylvania's 18th and Georgia's 6th, the Democrats put forth a non-politician, a 30-something-year-old,
But he did have some political moves, though, because he tacked right on issues like abortion, right? So he may be, quote, unquote, a non-politician on paper.
But on
some
paper,
of your party are tacking, and that's a very politically calculated move.
But Obviously, because you want to win, right? I mean, when you have Republicans putting out there another 50-plus something white guy who has a lot of political background.
But is it sincere?
Well, he's not a great candidate. I think that's
well,
fair.
And to Leslie and Pete's point, I mean, you do have similarities with Conor Lamb, where you do have a younger 30-something-year-old versus an older person who's been in, state and local politics for a longer period of time. So we'll see how this plays out in this district. But I think more largely speaking for Republicans, any House member should be deeply concerned and running as if they're 10 points behind, because you look at special elections are special for a reason, so you don't want to try to glean too much. But what you can take away is consistently Democrats have outperformed in these special elections. And if you're a Republican, even if you're running in a red congressional district, you should be concerned and you should take your election very, very seriously.
Should you be calling the president? Like, can you tweet? Can you come in?
Well, look at Delaware County.
If I had a record of 20-1 on anything, I might have been an athlete.
Well, look at Delaware County tonight, which is where President Trump showed up, where they need Republicans to turn out. So look at there and see what happens in Delaware County.
So talk to me, Melissa, about this resist movement, because those numbers are hard to... Now, look, and the intensity on the left side, too, is not to be missed. But the president, obviously, his mojo is very strong here at 20-1. What's your take?
I think it's really interesting that normally in the midterm election, you have kind of a lack of enthusiasm all the way around because a president has been elected and they've not done what they said they were going to do. And so there's a lot of disappointment. And on the other side, there's kind of a regrouping and everyone's a little disenfranchised and disenchanted. In this case, Trump has been even more Trumpy than he ever promised to be. And anyone who thought that he was going to, soften around the edges has obviously been completely wrong. So those who love him are out in force and are more fired up than ever. And that's, a huge support for those that he goes out and endorses. And those who hate him are more fired up than ever before and can't believe how this has turned out even worse than they thought. So it's kind of a bizarre midterm in that everyone is more fired up than they are usually, in my opinion.
So Pete, when you and I and many of us on the couch are out talking with voters, how can you tell who has the most intensity? I mean, is it because what Melissa laid out are great points, but who goes to the polls out of that scenario?
Well, that's what matters the most. Midterm elections are base turnout elections for the most part. They're not like presidential elections.
So who's got the bigger base?
Well, exactly. If you go to...
in this district, Republicans.
The clip we played...
by more than 14%.
Well, fair enough, but the clip we played right there where they said moderate, what about moderate Republicans? Moderate Republicans have come to Trump. If you're a never Trumper, you're never going to like Trump, but he's got a 90% approval rating. I go to these county Republican events, different conservative events. Folks who were reluctant about Trump, look at what he's done, how he's kept his promises and actually done what politicians never do, and they've moved in his direction, even if they don't love all the bombast. So the Republicans are going to be there, the Democrats are a resist movement, and it'll be a turnout operation for the next couple of months in a big way.
Something that I've heard you say, Lisa, that I think is playing a role in all of this now is, people, as Melissa was pointing out, trying to get the president to be different, to go this way or that way. You have said all along that people just want someone who's genuine.
Yeah, I think that's one of the main reasons President Trump, look at even like with his donations to Democrats, he went out there and he was like, yeah, I thought I could buy them. I think people appreciated that authenticity where you had someone like Hillary Clinton who was completely inauthentic. But I will say I've worked during in campaigns on a couple different wave elections. One, I don't think we know if this is going to be one yet, but I remember even Melissa Bean's seat in Illinois. We had no idea that Joe Walsh was going to win that seat when I was working at the NRCC. So we don't really quite know how this is going to play out. I think we're going to know more after Labor Day in looking at polling and seeing where things are swinging. But Republicans should be concerned, even just historically, in the fact that Republicans have both bodies of Congress and the White House right now.
So I think it's interesting to see, if I could just say real quick, President Trump, so funny because he is, we're in communications and stuff. He's so great at marketing. I've heard him say so many times, Troy on Tuesday, Troy on Tuesday, Troy on Tuesday. And as he repeats that, it's meaningful the way he goes out and kind of helps market for candidates. Go ahead.
So, Leslie, I saw you as Lisa was talking, nodding your head. Why?
That's always nice.
Because like she said, Republicans need to be concerned. Remember, this district in Ohio is not going to be the indicator of a blue wave by a victory necessarily, but also looking at a margin.
Classic
no.
If we win and we lose, we
Melissa's going to like this. I'm going to say something.
Okay.
She's going to say I like it. Numbers, right? You like numbers, right?
Yeah.
You're good at numbers. And this comes down to numbers. There are more Republicans and more Republican money now that's coming in. Before the Democrat was up on the dollars.
Of course, they want to win.
The Democrats historically have not come out, and there are just numerically more Republicans to go out and vote than there are Democrats. However, If you look at these margins and you have 23 seats, even if it doesn't bring it down to 22 in Ohio, the overwhelming majority are in my state, California. And
okay. Does Melissa like it?
We got it, but all politics is local, is what I will say there.
All politics is also national.
The Iran sanctions back on as of midnight this morning. The Trump administration reimposing the first batch of economic penalties since President Trump decided to scrap the nuclear agreement back in May, calling it, quote, the worst deal ever negotiated. The president today tweeting, the Iran sanctions have officially been cast. They are the most biting sanctions ever imposed, and in November, they ratchet up to yet another level. Anyone doing business with Iran will not be doing business with the U.S. I am asking for world peace and nothing less. National Security Advisor John Bolton says the sanctions are already having an impact.
We think the sanctions that went into effect at midnight actually began to have an effect back in May when the president pulled out of the wretched Iran nuclear deal because many businesses around the world didn't want to risk losing business in the United States in order to continue to do business with Iran. So the implications are already pretty profound. They'll grow more profound in November when the oil-related sanctions kick in as well.
But House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi slamming the president, saying in a statement, quote, far from making us more safe, the president's latest ill-informed attempt to dismantle the successful Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action makes America and our allies less secure. This counterproductive action only diminishes America's international credibility, erodes our relationships and with our NATO and EU allies, and sets back the path towards a more stable region and peaceful non-nuclear future. But reimposing the sanctions may be already having the intended effect. Iran's president saying his country is open to negotiations with the U.S. if there is, quote, sincerity. Pete, I'll ask you first. I mean, you look at, if you say you can do business with us, or you can do business with them. Mm-hmm. Europe leapt in because they wanted to do business with Iran. They saw it as a large untapped market. There was young people. They were going to buy iPhones. They were going to drink Coca-Cola. They were going to be democratized. That has not happened. None of the money got to them. And if you look at it, there is rioting in the streets. I think both, you know, if you ask anyone in the EU, you want to do business with us or them, it's also about the fact there's not a lot of business to do in Iran, as it turned out.
Economic power still matters, and these leaders in the EU may say, hey, we don't like this. We want to keep the deal. We think the deal could have worked. Trump ran on scrapping it. He scrapped it. They ultimately have to make that choice, and indications are showing that Europe's going to side with America because they understand for their own economic benefit. It makes a lot more sense to go along tacitly, even if their rhetoric's going to say America shouldn't have done this. And this just puts that much more pressure on the regime. And I know they're saying they don't want regime changes because they want the conversation toward denuclearization. But all of this is destabilizing, which is exactly what happened in North Korea before President Trump sat down with them to talk about a pathway. Right. Ultimately, what you have to stay focused on is Iran can't have nukes. And I know that's what John Bolton thinks and Pompeo thinks and the president thinks. This needs to be all tools toward that end state.
And even more than that, if they just don't have money to fund terror around the world, if you just cut off what they're sending to Hezbollah and everywhere else.
But they're always going to have money.
Yes.
Isn't that a good thing?
Harris is right.
They're always
and what this does, in my opinion, it fans the flames of the haters, and they're going to write bigger checks. The bottom line, again, numbers. When you look at Iran, Iran has an incredible different type of demographic than most countries. They also have a different type of regime. Rouhani is very moderate. And
he's very moderate
compared to those that oppose him, Pete. And what could take his place and what could replace him in the future?
Him just don't want a theocratic regime that's crushing them economically.
Let's look at the demographics of Iran, okay? The demographics of Iran are many more males than females, extremely high unemployment, very youthful population. When you have so many young men who are then angry financially because we're oppressing the people, not these leaders, they're living fine
and why are they
without
protesting
sanctions.
The leaders?
They're protesting the leaders, but if you notice what happens, the way Iran does, unlike our country, thankfully, what do? They arrest people, they use violence, they kill people, people disappear, they torture people. These people will rise up not just to get
what's the solution?
we don't punish the people for a deal that's not going to happen.
Chose not to pay attention to that rise, it made it very complicated. It almost tacitly said to that government, which is so rapacious in terms of how it treats its citizens, yeah, go ahead, lock them up and kill them. I mean, we had an opportunity to get right in there, and I see you nodding. You know, because you're a veteran, you're a military veteran.
We had that opportunity. We decided to say nothing and not stand with the people.
To do it without guns and to do it with peace, but we didn't. We sat down, we sat on our hands while they were trying to have a revolution. We might have been able, even with social media and what we could do, we might have been able to make a difference.
Well, I think the Iranians see President Trump differently than President Obama. And one thing I will point out is you look at Iran's Navy and the hostilities we saw under President Obama and the harassment we saw, particularly, remember, just mere weeks after the Iran deal was cut, they put our 10 sailors on their knees and shot it for propaganda purposes. Well, guess what? Those harassments are basically at zero. The Navy had announced, I think it was back in July, and President Trump touted this as well. And so I think Iran views President Trump very differently in President Obama, in knowing that he would potentially follow through, and President Trump is a little bit tougher. Now, they're still, sponsoring terrorism and, disruption and things of that nature, but in terms of those hostilities with the Navy, we've not seen that.
And just one last question to Pete. I mean, when you talk about this deal, and we're not going to get a deal, there was never a deal. There is no deal to be had. I mean, when they say that people around the world say they never violated the deal, how do we know? We never verified it. We never inspected. There were never anytime, anywhere inspections. In order to have an inspection, you had to have already evidence that there was something going on. How would you have that evidence if you're not allowed anywhere in? And then they got to collect the samples. I mean, it was a complete joke from start to finish. Where am I wrong there?
You're not wrong at all. It was a pathway to a deal that enriched that regime. If you look at the GDP of Iran, it spiked after that deal significantly because they used the money they had and the new economic viability that they got in advance. They're losing that now, and that's going to hurt the regime. It's going to bring them into a weaker position. You debate with people when they're weak.
When we talk again, Leslie, I want to ask you about what the word sincere means and whether or not President Obama could give us a definition of that, because obviously Iran is expecting it. So what does that look like? Maybe that was an aside deal.
President Trump's legal team prepping a response letter to Special Counsel Robert Mueller over a possible interview with the president, what they're asking for, and whether Mueller will agree. Plus, another big day in the Paul Manafort fraud trial after bombshell testimony from his former business partner, Rick Gates, what Gates is saying today, and how a possible conviction could affect the president. We will discuss that ahead.
Fox News Alert, Special Counsel Robert Mueller's star witness, Rick Gates, is back on the stand today in the financial fraud trial of Paul Manafort. Yesterday, Gates calmly described to jurors how he and Manafort committed crimes together, concealing more than a dozen foreign bank accounts from the IRS and falsifying bank loan documents. He also confessed to embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars from Manafort by filing false expense reports. Gates is expected to soon face cross-examination by Paul Manafort's defense attorneys, who are keen on damaging his credibility. All of this having, right now, so far, nothing to do with the president. Paul Manafort, a lot of information by Rick Gates. What do you make of it?
Yeah, it's the Paul Manafort tax avoidance trial, paid for by taxpayers, that has absolutely nothing to do with Russian collusion. And most people you go around that don't live in media bubbles that we live in could absolutely care less about this trial.
Can I follow up?
It's all about rolling Manafort. It's all about rolling Manafort to get to the president.
I'll take the other side of that when you're ready.
Hold on one second. Okay. Can I just ask you, though, this Ukrainian president, who now is out and facing his own problems, was known to have aided some pro-Russian people within his government to allow attacks on his own people, technically.
Super corrupt, terrible stuff.
Horrible. That's where a lot of this money was flowing for. That's what we're learning out of this trial from Manafort. And the minute he was out of power, Manafort's finances started to dry up. Does any of that matter?
I mean, we're learning about how corrupt the consultant class is in Washington, D.C. on both sides of the aisle. I mean, the money dries up oftentimes domestically, so they go to tin pot dictators and other regimes that'll pay tons of money for just a little bit of influence, and they enrich themselves. It is the way D.C. elites often, both on the left and the right. What about Tony Podesta? He's part of all this as well. It's the same deal.
So you can see how the case is laying out, and it's just as you guys said. So he made an absolute fortune overseas from people connected to the Russians. He tried not to pay tax on it. The money dried up. That's all being laid out. It's clear. It seems like it's hard to dispute that. What we are missing and what we need next is then the link. Was there someone who then tried to use him, since he's under financial distress, to then infiltrate the Trump campaign on the part of the Russians. There's no evidence so far. No one has even said that. But that's where this would matter. That's the link that we need, and we haven't seen it.
So without the link, you can still accomplish what Pete's talking about, though. You can pressure Manafort and pressure those people who are under the microscope.
But they'd have to lie and make it up and say there was a person that came to them.
Oh, they haven't done that already? I mean, there's been plenty of throughout this whole
thing. Think about the time when President Trump, or then candidate Trump, hired Manafort. So Manafort has extensive experience working with George W. Bush, Ronald Reagan. He was one of the last folks that had worked. He helped manage the floor at the contested convention.
Correct.
There was thought at the time that there might be a contested convention for a Republican, which was in part the reason why President Trump hired him. He then fired him once the ties to, Ukraine hit and all the negative stories came out about Paul Manafort. Now, you could argue, everyone knew that he was a bad dude. He shouldn't have hired him. Sure, but I think you also look at it from a purely political standpoint. There was reason to bring him on the team. But, look, Manafort is a bad dude. We know that now. But none of this stuff has to do with President Trump.
So, Leslie,
unless there's a link, that's what we need to see.
Well, do we
know enough about, because I think we don't, about how hard the FBI might have tried to let the Trump campaign know that they were looking at Paul Manafort for years and years and years? I mean, it's not like the authorities didn't already have this on the landscape, right? The authorities, so it would come from them.
Well, we know that the president was briefed before he became president after the election. And Pete, I want to say something.
After the election.
I want to say something to your point. This is 18 counts. This is not one count. And I understand, you have to understand Mueller's position and his job that he is tasked with is threefold. There's collusion, there's obstruction of justice, but there is Russian election interference, okay? Which this is part of the broader investigation of. So from where I sit a legal perspective, from where I sit it, it's his perspective. Is he supposed to say, I'm just going to throw this away?
No, you just laid out buckets that this has nothing to do with.
Lots of indictments of things that aren't.
I didn't say that. What I say is, if you are investigating something and you find crimes along the way, do you ignore those as an independent counsel?
I think Manafort clearly has done things that are illegal, and he's probably going to be
Mueller
in big
is doing
time
his job and doing the right thing, and we should want to pay our tax dollars to have
we've consistently seen things that have nothing to do with Russian collusion.
Mueller might be doing the right thing, but he's not doing his job.
From the very beginning, the judge said, we aren't going to bring up anything that has to do with collusion or any of that, so that we could concentrate on this. This isn't Manafort's only go, though, in court. Well,
that's right. Mueller might be doing the right thing by following illegality, but he's not doing his job. I mean, ultimately, that's not what we didn't send him. This could have been done by the Justice Department without a special counsel. All of these indictments
you don't know where his dots go. You don't see his playbook.
2 years later.
No, you don't see his playbook.
Oh, his playbook is on the front page of the New York Times when it needs to be. And if they had anything right now, you better believe it'd be A1 for 2 weeks straight.
See, Marco Rubio made that point the other day.
You're basically all saying the same thing if you look at it. What we've been saying, we see the connection between A and B and C. Now we need to see that last link.
Between A and C.
No, between the criminal behavior that seems to have happened with regard to this tax evasion and the connection to Russia, and then how something in there caused a pressure to get influenced in this campaign, how it connected to this campaign.
If there's such a thing.
We haven't seen that evidence yet. If it exists, we'd love to see it.
Okay, and back again, your socks
preferably
and tie
before
are
noon.
amazing. President Trump weighing in on a competitive primary, tipping his hat to Chris Kobach in the Kansas gubernatorial race. This, despite some top Republicans reportedly warning against such a move. So how's this going to work? And comedian turned activist Rosie O'Donnell leading a group of Broadway performers in a musical protest of President Trump outside the White House. Whether liberal celebrities have an impact or if their protest could backfire. We'll talk about it. Stay close.
Fox News alert, lots of focus on Ohio's special election today, but there is another big test of President Trump's influence. In Kansas, President Trump bucking the GOP establishment, endorsing firebrand Secretary of State Chris Kobach in his gubernatorial primary against the more moderate incumbent governor, Jeff Colyer. Kobach is known for his tough stance on immigration and support of voter ID laws. President Trump tweeting yesterday, Chris Kobach is a strong and early supporter of mine, is running for governor of the great state of Kansas. He is a fantastic guy who loves his state and our country. He will be a great governor and has my full and total endorsement. Strong on crime, border, and military. Vote Tuesday. But Republican leaders reportedly warned the president that Kobach is unpopular with the general electorate in Kansas and that if he becomes governor, it could energize Democrats in the state's congressional races. Kobach pushing back on that today. Watch.
This is definitely an establishment insider incumbent versus an insurgent conservative. But you know, those same voices were the people who were saying President Trump should never get the nomination because there's no way he can beat Hillary Clinton. He's too outspoken in his views. It's the same argument being made against me, and I don't think it'll wash.
Many of the president's endorsements have been candidates who are likely to win, but this one is different. The Washington Post sums it up this way. One of the first things that some GOP election insiders feared, a Trump endorsement of the candidate they don't want to win, just happened, which means Trump has a lot to prove in this endorsement in a way he hasn't had to before. What's your take on this one?
Well, I would say that the endorsement also came yesterday. The primary is tonight, so we'll see how big of an impact, how much time there is for that to make, that much of an impact. He's running against the current governor, Jeff Collier, who was tapped when Brownback, yeah.
Yes, that's
when
right.
he was appointed to an ambassadorship. So, we'll see what happens. I'm also looking at Kansas 3 because there's this socialist endorsed candidate in that race from Bernie Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez. So if that person wins, I think it's Brent Welder, then that seat may be a wash for Democrats.
Can I just ask you a quick follow-up just about the timing of things? Because, most people would say if the president is going to get behind you, it doesn't really matter when he does because he's behind you. But it is so close to election night. What do you make of the timing?
I think it could help him, Kobach, but I don't.
What was the delay? Do we know?
I don't know, but I will. I think the concern for, at least from party leadership, as Kobach said, the establishment or whatever, is that they're looking at this Kansas race, and the concern is that it may actually be competitive. And if you look at the governor's races across the country, there are 36. Republicans are defending, I think, 26 of those races. So Republicans are on the defense when it comes to these gubernatorial races. So I think there's a concern and a lack of desire to have to spend additional resources on a race that maybe wouldn't be as competitive as some of these other ones.
It's the same concerns you heard elections ago. Don't back Marco Rubio. Don't back Ted Cruz. Don't back insurgent candidates that the grassroots actually want. And I think establishment Republicans months ago told the president, don't endorse this guy. It might be too tough of a race. He wanted to. Chris Kobach was an early supporter of the president. He finally said, why am I listening to these establishment Republican leaders that didn't want me to enter the race either? Screw you guys. I'm going with my guy. He'll probably win. Trump won Kansas by 21 points on election night in 2016. If Chris Kobach can't win that race, then he's just a terrible candidate.
That's why.
And we hear time and time again, go with the moderate, go with the moderate. Stop it.
Yeah,
probably doesn't matter when the
president
tweets you. It's good.
Yeah,
exactly.
I mean, there was frustration in the past when presidents didn't get out there and didn't go in support and didn't spend their time working hard for these other candidates, given how much they had on their plate. Does it surprise you that the president is out there putting so much into it?
No, because I think he's looking at numbers and he's hearing from his party. He knows what happens historically, even though this is not a typical
presidents know that.
And presidency. But this is different because there is the possibility of a lot of seats and maybe one or both chambers being flipped, and he's out there. And I got to tell you, don't faint. I want Kobach to win. I want the president to have him win. He's more controversial than the incumbent. It makes it easier for a Democrat in the general. I think some Republicans would stay home. There's 3 alleged white supremacists that have worked for him, and everybody's like, what was up with this voter fraud commission that seemed to be kind of fraudulent itself? So I want him to win because I think it would be easier for a Democrat in the general in a very red district.
But I think for President Trump, there is that loyalty aspect because Kobach was an early supporter of President Trump. So, I think President Trump has demonstrated that he's loyal to many of those people that were with him and have been with him.
Yeah, he's remaking this party in his image. This is a guy who's been behind him, and I just don't buy it. I mean, I feel like when Republican grassroots are energized, they come out and vote. And Chris Kobach does that. A moderate governor who is kind of just, it doesn't get the base out the way you need in
Alabama,
2018.
Roy Moore.
Well,
that's a tiny
No,
When
What do you
people
make
have
of what
controversy.
Leslie just
Way
said? 'Cause
more
I mean,
controversial than Chris Kobach.
The voter fraud controversy is something that has come up.
Well, that was
here recently.
gunked up by legal challenge from the very beginning. It was never given.
My question is, what do you think voters make of all of that? You think they see the president's support and they say
I think they see a guy in Chris Kobach who was given a tough job to try to get at the swamp and the really corrupt voter laws in a lot of places where you don't even have to show an ID to vote, and they don't purge voter laws full of dead people, and they say, I want that guy, but he got resisted by the establishment, so let's give him another chance.
We are awaiting a letter from President Trump's legal team to special counsel Robert Mueller on conditions for a possible sit-down interview. Next, what Trump's team wants off limits and what that could mean for the Russia probe.
Fox News Alert, we are awaiting President Trump's legal team's response to Robert Mueller. We expect to get it in the form of a letter. It will set terms for an interview with the special counsel and likely reject any in-person questions about obstruction of justice. The president's legal team says they will consider some questions of obstruction in writing only. They also want questioning limited to events before the inauguration. Former Deputy Attorney General under President George W. Bush, Tom Dupree, says this.
Now we're actually negotiating terms and conditions. I think this is a carefully calibrated dance. I think the sides are moving closer together. And look, this is what lawyers do. They love to negotiate, and ultimately they often, not always, but often reach agreements.
Okay, so to put a fine point on this, you think this will happen in some form?
Yes, I do, and I think it will be a combination of oral questioning and written questioning.
Tom is such a supreme legal mind. Let's talk politics. We'll leave the legalities to him.
Thank you.
This is great for the president because this back and forth reinforces his desire to sit down. But what he said before was, I'll let the legal minds work it out and then I'll do what they tell me. But the desire is there. And this proves it. Because they are really having a strong, real conversation, go back and forth.
He said he wants to. He clearly does. He feels like he can exonerate himself better than anybody else. But it's, every lawyer says don't do it. Why would you do it? You're walking into a
but
trap.
This is about politics.
This is about politics. Listen, you answer a few questions about collusion, which, never happened. Let the rest be written down, and it's done. Button it up and end it.
I totally disagree. I think this strong, real conversation back and forth is total BS.
You think he won't do it or will?
No, I think it's all for show. I think it's all for the media. I don't think they're going to sit down for a conversation. It is about politics
regardless
on
of
the
whether
surface.
they sit.
I don't believe it's a real, sincere conversation about whether or not they're really sitting down. I just think it's out there in the media to look like there's a negotiation.
Don't you think there's a real
on the
tension,
Trump side?
The president wants to, and his team doesn't think he should.
I don't know if I believe that.
I think the president wants to, like many people think when they sit down with a counsel and a prosecutor, they think that they can outsmart them, or they can convince them, or they can show how they're wrong.
Or they're innocent and they want the ability to clear their name.
I think whether a person, I'm not saying whether he's innocent or guilty here. I'm saying that if I were advising him, if I were Giuliani, I would not let him have this one-on-one because he
thinks it's a good idea.
I don't think it's a good idea. I think he's going to open up a can of worms that aren't even there for him, perhaps. The situation much worse for him.
But you also look at something like Michael Flynn, who told congressional investigators that the FBI agents didn't think that he lied, and then as soon as Mueller takes over, he pleads to, one count of perjury, essentially. So I think there's concern that maybe they just try to find something, period, as Judge Ellis said in the Manafort case, that basically Mueller is gunning for impeachment or prosecution. And what I think is interesting is there seems to be a focus on the obstruction of justice aspect of this, because I think that's really the only level of vulnerability. Marco Rubio said on Fox News on Sunday, makes sense, right? That basically, if there's any evidence of collusion, it would have surfaced by now, right? And there was reports recently that Mueller was potentially looking at the tweets, which to me seems like they're kind of grasping at straws to try to find anything.
We don't know what he has.
And James Comey, that's what it seems to me. And then 2.5 years.
And the ball is moving on how social
sort of
media plays a role anyway.
Point.
I mean, we're inundated daily with how the ball is moving on social media. So, I mean, we don't know what he has. We don't know what he's looking for.
I think it seems like
I can't think of anything I've done, and I don't want to sit down with a special prosecutor. So that's all I can say. I don't know who wants to do that.
You and I rarely agree. High five from over here on that.
The president's base, though, different from what we would do. We wouldn't take a poll to figure out if we were going to sit down with the special counsel.
I would not.
But his base has indicated, look, they respect the fact that he had offered to do it.
Yeah.
He doesn't have to. The point I was making is he winning the battle just by having a discussion? Now, Melissa doesn't think it's earnest, but
yeah, I'm also, you talk to his base, I'm also so bored by this. It's like, enough already. If we knew it, it'd be there. All right. They're trying to discredit him. They've been trying to do that from the beginning.
Hollywood hitting at President Trump on both coasts. First, the move to remove his star from Hollywood's Walk of Fame for good. The action city leaders are taking there as Rosie O'Donnell leads Broadway performers in a sing-along demonstration right outside the People's House. That's our house, y'all. Whether these protests are actually changing minds or just helping the president, we'll debate it.
Let the president know in no uncertain terms that we are alive, awake, and we are woke.
Can you feel a brand new day? Sun's on a spider web, guitar, life is around you and you.
More Outnumbered in just a moment, but first we touch base with Harris on what's coming up on Outnumbered Overtime in just a few moments. Harris.
A lot going on this Tuesday. Thank you, Melissa. President Trump is an impressive 20-1 so far in statewide endorsements, but his biggest challenge, his biggest gamble, some say, may come in 2 of today's 5 races. The president as kingmaker and what it could mean for the midterm elections. Our power panel will weigh in, and the president's legal team is preparing its response to special counsel Robert Mueller on conditions for that potential sit-down interview. Who better to join me on that than Judge Andrew Napolitano? Naps is in the House. Could Mueller issue a subpoena to the president after all of the deal-making? More on Outnumbered Overtime. See you then. Melissa?
Sounds like a good show. All right, well, Hollywood is not letting up in its ongoing attacks on President Trump. West Hollywood City Council voting unanimously to ask the president's Walk of Fame star, which has been the target of repeated vandalism, to be removed. While the vote is largely just symbolic, the city's mayor says the president is not deserving of the honor, telling CNN the West Hollywood City Council did not pass the resolution because Donald Trump is a conservative or a Republican. Earning a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame is an honor. When one belittles and attacks minorities, immigrants, Muslims, people with disabilities, or women, the honor no longer exists. Meantime, on the East Coast, longtime Trump nemesis Rosie O'Donnell leading a group of Broadway performers in a musical protest last night, right in front of the White House. Cast members from Hamilton, Wicked, and Les Mis singing show tune favorites as part of an ongoing anti-Trump demonstration, which is now in its 23rd day. Take a listen.
Will you join in our crusade? Who will be strong and stand with me? Somewhere beyond the barricade, is there a world you long to see?
And Rosie took this jab at the president.
And we're going to keep coming back until he's out. Let the president know in no uncertain terms that we are alive, awake, and we are woke. We are not going away. Good silent people are the wind behind evil.
I think it's safe to say Rosie O'Donnell and Donald Trump have a history. But Leslie, you had told me that your response to this would surprise me. Surprise me.
Okay. All right. Are you listening? Rosie, my fellow Democrats, we are woke. We march, we protest, we sing, and I'm not going to do that today, although I did consider it to say this. You have to vote. If they don't vote, it doesn't matter. Historically, Democrats do not show up in the midterms. They keep saying that they want Trump to be a one-term president, that they want to vote them out, hashtag vote them out, blue wave, blue tsunami. None of that happens because as great as we are at marching and protesting, we're not as great voting. We saw this happen in the general election. 2016, hundreds of thousands of people in this country marched the day after the election, and my man on the street, man on the street for my radio show went out there and interviewed and said, you know, who did you vote for? Do you know what they said? Oh, well, I didn't vote. I stayed home. Or I thought Hillary had it in the bag. You can't do that. You have to get out and vote.
I'm moderately surprised.
So the singing is lovely and entertaining, but it's not effective.
Well, so you know a thing or two about this world. Isn't it now? I mean, look, the most unoriginal idea in Hollywood is to hate President Trump. I mean, what do you make of all this?
It's true. Well, I thought the singing was lovely. Their voices were amazing. And I thought that it was very rich to me when they talked about disrespecting women and belittling women, because Bill Cosby and Harvey Weinstein also have stars. And I'm wondering if they want to remove those as well. They said no. So, I mean, I don't know. There you go.
Well, so always with the good points. Pete, okay, so does this backfire? Because we've seen the RNC already put together an ad basically using Maxine Waters' statement of calling for harassment of Trump officials. They also used Madonna saying that she wanted to blow up the White House, Kathy Griffin holding up this severed head. So does this backfire, and can Republicans use this against Democrats?
I don't know if it backfires. It doesn't work. I mean, they've tried it, the celebrity motivation, time and time again. It's not effective. And it boomerangs a little bit, right? Republicans turn around and say, are those your beliefs? Are you going to let them ram them down your throat? Is West Hollywood representative of you? Is Manhattan representative of you? No. Get out and make sure your voice is heard. Now, Leslie, you talked about Democrats. Democrats also not great at scheduling, because the president actually wasn't in the White House while they held their sing-along. So doubly not that effective.
So next time they need to check the schedule then, is what
Maybe
you're
they
saying.